Welcome. In this particular video, we'll be finding reciprocal trigonometric ratios of any angles using radians. Let's take a look at example 1. Find the value of the indicative function for the specified angle. In this particular case, we're looking for cosecant of theta when theta happens to be negative 16 pi over 3. So let's go ahead and write down important information here. We are looking for cosecant of negative 16 pi over 3. Now cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So this is the same as saying, okay, we want 1 over sine of negative 16 pi over 3. Now on the unit circle, we know the following two facts. X is equal to cosine of theta, and y is equal to sine of theta. Now, unfortunately, we don't have any angle negative 16 pi over 3 on the unit circle. So what we're going to do, we're going to focus our attention on this component first. So we're going to rewrite sine of negative 16 pi over 3, and we're going to find any angle that happens to be coterminal with this particular angle measure. So we're going to say this is sine of 2 pi minus 16 pi over 3. Now looking at the common denominator, we can rewrite this one as sine of 3 times 2 pi over 3 minus 16 pi over 3. And this happens to be sine of 6 pi over 3 minus 16 pi over 3. So this is just sine of negative 10 pi over 3. Notice though, this is still not one of the angles in here. So let's find the sine of another coterminal angle. So we can say this is sine of 2 pi minus 10 pi over 3. Now looking at the common denominator, this can be rewritten as sine of 3 times 2 pi over 3 minus 10 pi over 3. So this is just the same as sine of 6 pi over 3 minus 10 pi over 3, which happens to be sine of negative 4 pi over 3. Still not one of the angles in there, so let's find the equivalent sine of coterminal angle. So we can say this is the same as sine of 2 pi minus 4 pi over 3. Looking at the common denominator, this is the same as sine of 3 times 2 pi over 3 minus 4 pi over 3, which happens to be sine of 6 pi over 3 minus 4 pi over 3, which happens to be sine of 2 pi over 3. Now then, the good news is that now we have an angle on the unit circle. So we look at 2 pi over 3. Okay, so we're looking at 2 pi over 3 here. And notice 2 pi over 3 has x coordinate of negative 1/2. But what we really want is the sine, so we're going to take the y coordinate. So that's square root of 3 over 2. So this is the square root of 3 over 2. But notice that's not what we really wanted. What we wanted is cosecant. Okay, so this implies that cosecant, not CO, but let me erase this one real quick. This implies that cosecant, in our case, of our angle, in this case our angle was negative 16 pi over 3, is the same as the reciprocal of this guy. Is the same as 2 over the square root of 3. But we don't like to have square roots in the denominator, so we need to rationalize it. And to do that, we multiply it by square root of 3 over the square root of 3. Now this one will be 2 square root of 3 over the square root of 3 times 3, which is square root of 9. And the square root of 9 is 3. So this is just 2 square root of 3 over 3. So one can conclude, therefore, by the transitive property of equality that cosecant of negative 16 pi over 3 is equal to 2 times the square root of 3 over 3. So let's see a couple more examples. Example 2, find the value of the indicated function for the specified angle. In this case, we're looking for secant of theta, where theta happens to be 14 pi over 3. So let's write it out. So secant of 14 pi over 3. Now, let's recall a few things. Well, first of all, secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So this is 1 over cosine of 14 pi over 3. And let's also remember that on the unit circle we have that x is equal to cosine of theta and y is equal to sine of theta. So in this case, let's focus our attention with the cosine. So we have cosine of 14 pi over 3. Since that's not an angle on the unit circle, let's find the cosine of a coterminal angle. So this is the same as cosine of 14 pi over 3 minus 2 pi. Now, we are going to look for the common denominator, so this is the same as cosine of 14 pi over 3 minus 2 pi times 3 over 3. So this will be the same as cosine of 14 pi over 3 minus 6 pi over 3. So that gives you cosine of 14 minus 6 gives you 8. So this is cosine of 8 pi over 3. But this is still not on the unit circle, so let's take the cosine of a coterminal angle. So this is the same as cosine of 8 pi over 3 minus 2 pi. Now looking for the common denominator, this is cosine of 8 pi over 3 minus 2 pi times 3 over 3. So this gives you cosine of 8 pi over 3 minus 6 pi over 3. Notice that this is just cosine of 2 pi over 3. And this is now an angle that we can find on the unit circle. Now, let's take a look at 2 pi over 3, which happens to be here. Since we're focusing with cosine, that's your x coordinate, so that will give you negative 1/2. So this is the same as negative 1/2. So cosine of 2 pi over 3 is the same as negative 1/2. But that's not what we want originally. What we want is secant. So we said, okay, secant, therefore secant of, in this case, our angle 14 pi over 3 is equal to 1 over cosine of 14 pi over 3. But we said that cosine of 14 pi over 3 was the same as 1 over the cosine of 2 pi over 3. So we have that this is 1 over negative 1/2, or we can just say, okay, what's the reciprocal of negative 1/2? And that happens to be negative 2. So by the transitive property of equality, one can conclude that secant of 14 pi over 3 is equal to negative 2. So let's see one more example. Example 3. Find the value of the indicated function for the specified angle. In this case, we're being asked to find cotangent of theta, where theta happens to be 17 pi over 3. So let's recall that cotangent of 17 pi over 3 is the same as 1 over tangent of 17 pi over 3. Now 17 pi over 3 is not an angle in here on the unit circle. So what we're going to do, we're going to focus our attention on tangent of this particular angle, and we're going to take the tangent of coterminal angles here. So tangent of 17 pi over 3 is the same as tangent of 17 pi over 3 minus 2 pi, which is the same as tangent of 17 pi over 3 minus 2 pi times 3 over 3. So we can find the common denominator. So this is the same as tangent of 17 pi over 3 minus 6 pi over 3, which gives you tangent of 11 pi over 3. Now 11 pi over 3 is still not an angle in there, so we're going to get the tangent of a coterminal angle. So tangent of 11 pi over 3 minus 2 pi. Now this is the same as tangent of 11 pi over 3 minus 2 pi times 3 over 3, which will give you tangent of 11 pi over 3 minus 6 pi over 3. Now this is equal to tangent of 5 pi over 3. Now paying close attention here, we can actually see that this is an angle on the unit circle. Okay, so 5 pi over 3. Here we have our values there. Now, coming back to this, we know that tangent happens to be sine, okay, of this angle, 5 pi over 3, divided by cosine of 5 pi over 3. Now, this is the same as your y over your x. So let's take a look at your y coordinates here. Your y coordinate happens to be negative root 3 over 2. It's negative root 3 over 2 divided by your x coordinate, which happens to be 1/2. Now, this is equivalent to the following. Okay, one can rewrite this one as follows. Negative root 3 over 2 divided by 1/2. Or we can do the multiplication by the reciprocal. So this is negative square root of 3 over 2 times the reciprocal 1/2, which is 2 over 1. The 2's cancel, and you end up with negative root 3 for tangent. But that was not our goal. Our goal was to figure out what was cotangent for the specific angle, in this case 17 pi over 3, which we said was the reciprocal of this. Okay, so it's 1 over negative root 3. Now, we don't like to have the square roots in the denominator, so we're going to rationalize by multiplying this one by 1 in the form square root of 3 over square root of 3, and that gives us 1 times square root of 3, which is the square root of 3, and negative times the square root of 3 times 3, which is the square root of 9. So this leaves us with root 3 over negative square root of 9, which is 3. And one can simply put the negative in front and say that this is negative square root of 3 over 3. So in general, we can say here that cotangent, by the transitive property of equality, cotangent of 17 pi over 3 is equal to negative square root of 3 over 3. And with this example, we can conclude this video on finding reciprocal trigonometric ratios of any angles given radians. Thank you for watching, and have a wonderful day.